The glare of studio lights shimmered across the glass table as cameras rolled live, broadcasting to millions across the country. On screen, it looked polished. Clean lines, sharp suits, practiced smiles. But behind that sheen, tension simmered just beneath the surface. Fox News had promised a can't-miss panel discussion, and tonight it would deliver something far beyond what anyone expected. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, also subscribe. The topic was political polarization, the players, seasoned commentators, fresh-faced strategists, and two rising voices who couldn't have been more different. Jessica Tarlov, the network's progressive firebrand, sat upright in her chair, ready to spar. Across from her was Karoline Leavitt, a younger conservative figure who'd made headlines recently for her unflinching support of Donald Trump amid swirling controversies. Their past encounters had been heated, but this time felt different. The energy in the room was heavier, more personal. The segment began with typical back and forth, numbers, polls, the usual volleys about media bias and party failures. But the temperature spiked when Jessica interrupted mid-sentence. "I'm sorry, but we can't keep pretending Karoline represents any kind of solution," she said, her tone acidic but composed. "You don't advocate for people. You parrot a party line. And frankly, defending Trump in this moment doesn't make you brave, it makes you reckless." Gasps rippled from the production crew just off camera. The host, visibly caught off guard, glanced at the teleprompter, then back at the panel, unsure whether to jump in or let it play out. The producers in the control room were already scrambling. Whispers, frantic hand signals, split-second decisions. Jessica leaned forward, her voice rising in intensity. "You're not just misguided, Karoline. You're dangerous. You defend the indefensible, and the country suffers for it." The studio stilled. Viewers at home leaned in. On social media, clips of the moment were already being screen recorded, captioned, and uploaded. All eyes turned to Karoline. The camera found her face, expecting a reaction. Any sign of anger, defense, or deflection. But she didn't speak. She didn't even blink. Karoline sat silently, her expression unreadable, her hands calmly folded on the table. There was no flash of panic in her eyes, no instinct to strike back. She simply held her posture like stone, unshaken. The silence, in its own way, spoke louder than anything Jessica had said. Jessica glanced around, clearly expecting applause, or at least a nod of agreement from her peers. Instead, the weight of Karoline's silence hung in the room like thick fog. No shouting match, no denial, just presence, just poise. Inside, Karoline wasn't numb, far from it. Her mind raced, not with comebacks, but with memories. She thought of the time she stood ankle deep in muddy water in East Palestine, Ohio, after the chemical spill. She remembered the mothers who stood beside her, crying over poisoned wells and sick children. No cameras, no statements, just desperation and quiet grief. She remembered holding the trembling hand of a young cancer patient in a crumbling hospital while his mother whispered thanks that someone, anyone had come to listen. She remembered broken promises in forgotten towns, where residents had been left behind, not by one administration, but by all of them. These weren't partisan memories. They weren't policy points. They were moments burned into her bones. She felt them now, sharper than Jessica's words, stronger than any insult flung across a table. Jessica's eyes narrowed. She wasn't used to silence. She fed on reaction, on visible opposition. Karoline's stillness unnerved her. "Nothing to say?" Jessica prodded, her tone turning bitter. "Of course not, because you can't defend this. You sit there and smile while families lose everything." The host tried to interject with a soft, "All right, let's keep this civil," but the words barely registered. The studio's focus remained locked on the two women. Behind the glass, the control room was split. Some producers gestured to cut to commercial. Others shook their heads, sensing a moment of television history unfolding live. But none of those told the full story, because Karoline wasn't cornered. She wasn't avoiding the conversation. She was waiting. She understood the rhythm of confrontation, the temptation to lash out, to match volume with volume. But she also understood something deeper. Silence is its own kind of force. Let them talk. Let the noise swell. Truth can wait. The camera zoomed in again, closer this time. No cracks, no trembles, just steel in her eyes. And still, she said nothing. The moment held, and then held longer, until even Jessica shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what she had actually won. And that's where it truly began. Not with shouting or headlines, but with the unspoken, with the restraint that confused the firebrands and captivated the quiet observers. The next words would break the silence, but they weren't ready yet. Karoline was. The silence stretched further, bending the moment until even the camera operator hesitated before adjusting the shot. Jessica Tarlov's last barb still hung in the air, sharp and unresolved. She waited, impatient now, for Karoline Leavitt to bite back, for the claws to come out, for some sign that her accusations had struck a nerve. But all she got was the quiet, and it wasn't submission, it wasn't avoidance, it was control. That realization began to gnaw at Jessica. Her voice, sharpened by years of media debate, had just failed to do what it always did: break her opponent's composure. Karoline's stillness wasn't passive, it was deliberate, and it rattled Jessica more than she cared to admit. "You think this makes you noble?" Jessica snapped again, the calm cracking in her tone. "Sitting there like some martyr while Americans suffer, while families cry out for help, and you defend a man who's done nothing but lie and divide." She leaned forward, her face tight with frustration. "You say you care about the forgotten people, yet when they march, when they beg for justice, you call them ungrateful. When working mothers can't feed their kids, you talk about tax cuts. When black communities cry out against violence, you call it theater. You don't care. You pretend to." The host, now visibly uncomfortable, tried to step in. "Let's keep this productive." But Jessica wasn't finished. "You're nothing more than a mouthpiece," she spat. "A curated puppet in a red dress sent out to soften the image of a party that abandoned decency long ago." Gasps again from somewhere in the control booth. The producer's voice crackled in the earpieces. "Do we cut? Is this a liability?" The host's eyes darted toward the camera, unsure whether to throw to break or ride the chaos. One panelist reached for his coffee with an awkward laugh, trying to disappear behind his mug. Another shifted papers like that might distract from the powder keg on screen. But nothing could. Jessica had gone all in. Her tone now teetered between righteous fury and something more desperate, like she was trying to convince herself as much as the audience. And still, Karoline did not move. No tears, no rebuttal, not even a smirk. Her silence had evolved into a mirror, and Jessica was seeing herself in it, exposed and uncertain. On Twitter, the segment was already viral. Clips with captions like, "Jessica just ended Karoline's career." Leavitt humiliated live on Fox. Karoline folds under pressure, but other voices emerged too. Why isn't she flinching? She's just staring her down. This is calculated. Watch her. Inside Karoline's mind, the chaos of the studio was miles away. She was still in East Palestine, still on the hospital ward floor in St. Louis, still walking with steelworkers in Pittsburgh, whose factory had closed without warning. She wasn't holding back because she was lost. She was holding back because this moment was bigger than Jessica, bigger than Fox News. This wasn't a fight between pundits. This was about something deeper. She remembered a line from her grandfather, whispered to her during her first campaign. Let them scream. The ones who scream the most usually have the least to say. And so she waited. Jessica's frustration boiled over. "Answer the damn question," she shouted louder now. "Why do you defend corruption while Americans suffer? Why do you cover for a man who left families to fend for themselves during a pandemic, during economic collapse, during moral decay?" Karoline finally shifted. Just slightly. She uncrossed her legs, adjusted her chair, and leaned in toward the microphone. It was the first movement she'd made in minutes, and it felt seismic. The host leaned back instinctively. The producers in the control room froze, eyes glued to the monitor. One intern dropped their notepad. A floor manager whispered, "Here it comes." And then, softly, without raising her voice, Karoline spoke. "Jessica," she began, her voice steady and low. "Where were you when mothers buried their children?" Jessica blinked. The words didn't just interrupt the rhythm, they stopped time altogether. Karoline didn't flinch, didn't blink. She wasn't retaliating, she was grieving. "Where were you," she continued, "when chemical spills poisoned entire towns and the people affected didn't fit your narrative? When children drank brown water and you called it a red state problem?" Silence. "I was there. I held those hands. I walked those streets. I listened, not to lobbyists, not to pollsters, but to people. Real people who don't speak in hashtags or sound bites." Jessica's eyes widened, not in rage, but in something closer to disbelief. Karoline leaned in a fraction more, her tone unwavering. "You think I'm dangerous because I'm calm while you shout, because I don't collapse under your performance. But it's not strength you're fighting, it's memory, it's experience, it's truth." The studio went absolutely still. In the control room, someone muttered, Holy hell. The host sat back, no longer attempting to moderate. He knew this wasn't his moment. Jessica's confidence faltered. Her mouth opened to speak, but nothing came out. Karoline didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She let the silence return, but this time it wasn't empty. It was filled with something undeniable. Authority, weight. On screens across the country, viewers stared at their televisions, unsure what they had just witnessed. It wasn't a takedown in the traditional sense. No yelling, no name calling, no theatrics, but it was devastating. Jessica's attack had landed like a barrage of fireworks. Loud, fiery, impressive, but Karoline's words were like a single scalpel stroke. Quiet, surgical, fatal. The host finally found his voice. We're going to take a quick break, but nobody moved, because they all knew when they returned, everything would be different. The screen went dark for commercial, but the studio was anything but calm. A producer ripped off his headset, muttering profanities as he stormed out of the control room. Another leaned over the board, scrolling through the stream of text lighting up her phone. Network executives, political operatives, reporters, all demanding to know what just happened. Inside the studio, the panelists sat in silence. Jessica Tarlov was frozen, her expression locked in something between confusion and disbelief. Her words, once cutting, once unstoppable, now felt hollow in the air, echoing off the memory of Karoline's quiet voice. The host cleared his throat again. We're back in 20 seconds. He looked over at Karoline, who sat in the exact same position as before. Calm, composed, not triumphant, just ready. Jessica glanced down at the table. Her pen was shaking slightly in her hand. The floor manager gave the silent countdown. 5, 4, 3. The red light above the main camera clicked on. They were live again, but the energy had shifted completely. The host tried to regain his footing. Welcome back. Before the break, we, heard some strong opinions from both sides. Karoline, you were responding to— I wasn't responding, Karoline said softly. I was remembering. Another silence followed. Even the other panelists, who had kept their distance until now, watched her with renewed attention. People want to fight, she continued, her voice even. They want blood, because it's easier to get angry than to get honest. But I didn't come here to brawl with Jessica or anyone else. I came here because people out there don't have a seat at this table, and they're tired of being spoken about like props in someone else's outrage. Jessica shifted in her seat, trying to reclaim control. Then say it plainly, she said, voice strained. You still support Donald Trump after everything? Karoline didn't blink. I support the people who feel invisible, she answered. I support the people both parties left behind. If they found a voice in Trump, it's not because they were brainwashed. It's because they were ignored. And if you're more offended by their loyalty than by the systems that failed them, then you're not listening. You're lecturing. It wasn't a defense. It was a diagnosis. The host looked stunned. Jessica opened her mouth, closed it again. She'd had plenty more planned, but none of it seemed usable now. Across the country, phones vibrated on desks. Televisions flickered in diners and living rooms. YouTube clips of the exchange were being clipped, edited, and uploaded by the second. Twitter and Truth Social ignited into two camps, each trying to define the moment before the other side could. Conservative influencers posted, Karoline Leavitt just demolished the corporate narrative. This is how you fight back, not with volume, with values. She didn't debate, she witnessed. Liberal accounts fought back. Do not fall for the calm delivery. This is still dangerous populism. Silence is not virtue when it masks complicity. A polished tone doesn't make a lie true. But somewhere in the middle, a different current was forming. Clips were being shared not by ideologues, but by school teachers, factory workers, veterans, and nurses. People who usually didn't comment on politics. Their captions weren't loud. They said things like, I've never seen anyone keep their cool like that. I don't agree with her, but I respect her composure. This felt real. It was no longer just a story about politics. It was a story about presence, about restraint in a culture that rewarded rage. That night, every cable news recap opened with the moment. Jessica Tarlov confronts Trump defender live. Karoline Leavitt flips the script with soft-spoken counterattack. Shock silence, a debate that wasn't. CNN replayed the clip under a chyron that read, "The new face of the culture war." MSNBC took a sharper tone. Silence as strategy, the manipulation of media moments. But Fox News, eager to seize the momentum, did something unexpected. They re-aired the entire segment, unedited in prime time. It wasn't just a replay, it was a statement. Karoline didn't watch it that night. She was on a flight back to New Hampshire, phone on airplane mode, forehead pressed to the window. The lights of distant towns passed beneath her like a constellation of forgotten stories. She wasn't thinking about the moment itself, she was thinking about what came next. Because moments don't matter unless they lead to movement. And while the media was dissecting her tone, her timing, her body language, she was already thinking about how to bring the conversation back to those who didn't get airtime. Back in the studio, Jessica sat alone after the camera stopped. She replayed it in her head, over and over, not just the words, the pause, the precision, the weight of a reply that hadn't been designed to win Twitter, but to mean something. She wasn't angry, not now. What she felt was harder to name, because for the first time in a long time, she hadn't been met with noise, but with clarity. And clarity is hard to argue with. If you like this video, then subscribe.